Hey guys, it's Stuart once again. After speaking to over 500,000 people around the world and being in the speaking profession for the last 29 years, it's given me a little bit more hope that whatever it is that I've been saying has been able to impact people, has been able to improve the lives of the people around me, and more importantly, it's given me a certain sense or a glimpse of the kinds of problems that people face. And these problems that they actually do face give me a little bit of the goosebumps because the mindset surrounding it is really just not correct. And because this channel is all about the mindset that you hold, I'm going to talk about the mindset behind mindsets today. And some of them will end up being paradoxical, and if anything, it's going to help you to get to a certain level of thinking that could probably help you to make some major breakthroughs. So let's dive right in. I've got 9 key things I want to talk about. I hope that it will make a huge difference to those of you who are listening and attempting to take some kind of action. So let's dive in. Point number 1, holding back versus giving more. I find that this mindset is very common when people are feeling like they're in the poverty mindset. They feel like they can't give more, and they feel like they're being dragged down by certain things that are already causing them quite a lot of angst and difficulty. So I remember a moment in my life where I was kind of broke, and unfortunately it was difficult for me to even spend money on higher quality foods. So I remember there was a day during this period of time where a friend actually reached out to me and said, hey, you know, I'm doing a fundraiser, would you actually raise funds? I'm gonna take this amount of money and spend it on a good cause. I can't remember what it was. I think it was buying food for the homeless or something. And I responded. I took a look at what was in my bank. It wasn't a lot, but I was taking a look at what he needed to raise the funds, and most people were donating like $5 or $10. And I said, you know what, maybe just for the sake of encouragement, I just put $150. I didn't have that much left. And while it wasn't like a bank breaker, I did donate that money. And to a certain extent, I was actually uncomfortable giving that amount of money away as well. But as I gave, I wasn't looking for accolades or anything like that. I was hoping that I could spur other people on to also give in spite of their conditions. So what happened was that, you know, no holds barred, I just went in, and the person who was seeking the donations actually wrote me and said, dude, that's a huge amount, are you sure? And I didn't think it was really a huge amount. I mean, relative to what I had left in the bank, it was like maybe about 15%, I think. And I said, no, you know, I'm just gonna pay it forward. And I know this sounds a little bit cliched, but I had this forward moving mentality, and what it did do for me was it enabled me to realize that money is all relative. And if I had a huge amount of money versus a small amount of money, I'm no different as a person. So if I hold back, I'm practicing holding back. If I give back more, I'm practicing abundance. And the more I practice abundance, the better I'll be. So does that mean that if I had extra money in the bank account, I'm just gonna give it all away? Nope, I'm just gonna approach it from the standpoint of giving more that creates the best possible benefit for myself. So if I am just giving because it's easy to give, it's not good for me, so therefore I won't give it. If I don't have enough and I were to give it, it's a kind of giving that will help me to grow even more. So for those of you who find it difficult, lean into this and consider this new mindset. Number 2, incremental goals versus audacious goals. I've talked about this at length in some of my goal setting videos, but I think it warrants an understanding of this kind of mindset. Everybody wants to set goals. It's like, you know, today I'll do 3 tasks instead of 2. It's kind of incremental, isn't it? However, it doesn't change the way you think. Like for example, I had a big difficulty wrapping my head around how do I do daily videos and actually dole that out every single day. I said, well, I'll hire a whole bunch of people. But then hiring a group of people is also helpful for me in, you know, potentially getting 10 videos a day. Why don't I do that instead? What if I were to do this on my own? Is it possible for me to do 10 videos every single day on my own rather than hiring people? Would that require a severe change in the quality of my thinking? And what I've found out is that the quality of the thinking comes from the assumptions that we get. Those assumptions, like for example, when I'm doing these daily videos, the assumption is I'm going to do it, I'm going to edit it, and then I'm going to just post it. But what if I had an entire machinery that did that for me? Well, of course, I'll have to do the videos by recording it, but is there anything that I could do to just completely blow this out of the water without me really having to think about it too much? So this forces you to have a big goal, an audacious one, that forces a certain way of thinking around you. So there are a lot of people whom I think who are afraid of the audacious goal. So the reason being that they haven't really had any experience coming out with an audacious goal. So if you want to go from $50,000 a year to $250,000 a year, that seems very big, right? But relative to that, whomever has gotten to $250,000 a year and jumped to $10 million a year, that is a quantum leap. It did not come from an incremental goal. It came from a way of thinking that was completely different than when you have an incremental goal. So I want you to bear that mindset in mind as well. Number 3, stretching yourself rather than resting. I know this sounds probably counterintuitive to the point where it sounds dangerous, right? But I want to ask you how far you've gone to your limits. Like, for example, how far have you stretched? I mean, have you really gone and run that marathon? I know I haven't, so I can't say or claim that I'm the best at doing, let's say, running. Have I really pushed myself in the gym? I can honestly say that over the last few days of workouts, I haven't. And what does it mean for me to just, oh man, I'm really tired and I need a rest? Here's the thing. For all intents and purposes, from the research that I've gathered, when we work out, and this has happened to me on occasion, I'm also leaning into that, so stand by for my results. I intend to actually go into the gym, get my workouts done in a very intense fashion within a short span of time. So for example, I might be doing, instead of 3 sets of 8, I might be doing drop sets, like 3 drop sets with 0 rest in between, from my max number of reps all the way down to whatever it is I can muster in the shortest span of time to compress the workout. So literally, whatever drop sets that I do, it's just like one continual set all the way through to absolute failure of the muscle. So I've seen some people do that, and I've seen some people have the appetite to go for 3-4 sets of these, and it literally destroys you, right? But I don't know what my limit is if I have not tested myself. So stretching, rather than just going like, oh my gosh, that looks really terrible, it's like just looking at it makes me tired. That's not the thing that I think we should be living into, right? Get ourselves out there, stretch our potential, and go identify what can be our ceiling. And then from that ceiling, stretch a little bit further. Of course, there will be times where you just find that you cannot, and you just take that as a benchmark. I'm not asking you to completely kill yourself. What I am saying is that you haven't tested the limits of what is possible yet. And because you haven't tested those limits, you will never know how far you can stretch and how far you can grow. Number 4, have compassion for people who actually hurt you. I'm not the best person to talk about this because I tend to bear a grudge quite a fair bit. I know a lot of people don't know it, and I don't like the idea of me bearing a grudge, but that's the fact. And fortunately or unfortunately, the reason why I bear a grudge is just because I'm just not big-minded enough. And I'm working on that. I don't think that I'm like a saint or anything like that. I do feel that when I bear a grudge, it's a way of telling myself that I'm not grown up enough. I have to mature in that area. So it goes back to point number 3, where I stretch myself and I begin to see what the limit is to the kind of damage that people have done to me. When I do bear a grudge, I do find it difficult to hold compassion for any of these people that I bear a grudge to. So therefore, I need to start doing something different. I need to have compassion as the default emotional state in my life. So I put myself into this state of compassion first, and then I start thinking about these people. It's kind of like a reversal of the order. Sometimes when you think about the person, and then that causes an automatic, breakdown of how I feel about them almost automatically because of the trigger response, right? So I don't want to do that. I'll make sure I choose my responses first, put myself in the default compassion, and then I start looking at these people who may have betrayed me, caused me a lot of angst, caused me a lot of problems, and just lean into the compassion for them. Again, this is a work in progress, but what I found is that whenever I have compassion for other people, it serves me to not end up overutilizing energy that I shouldn't. Number 5, and this is something that has happened to me in the past, it is the urge to just keep my mouth shut, right? Whereas, and I'll give you a very significant story about this. When I was much younger, when I was in primary school, I was told to stand up and to read part of a storybook, and I was terrified. I remember standing up, my knees were shaking, and before I could even muster up the words to speak, my teacher just passed me on and said, okay, next person. So I didn't know whether that was just to brush me off or whether it was to save me face or whatever it was, whatever that action was didn't serve me at all. In fact, it caused me to feel a lower sense of worth, lower sense of self-esteem, and I think it would have been much better if I was encouraged to continue to speak up, even though it took a long time. Now, my take about this is quite simple. If you find it difficult to speak up, it probably is that you have not had very much practice speaking up. And what I found was, in my days in the Toastmasters, I knew this as a pattern. I was so terrified to go up on stage and to speak, I needed to muster enough time and courage to go up and talk. And the moment I was there, I wouldn't know whether I'd freeze, right? It's a standard public speaking issue. And if public speaking is such a big issue, then everybody should deal with it, and they should deal with it right now. My take is that you turn on the camera, you get into the right state, and you just keep going. And the moment you do that, you build up that confidence even though it sucks at first. I'm telling you, when you have nothing to say and you don't know what to say, it doesn't say anything about you, it tells you about the process that you've gone through. You gotta start curating ways to speak up and to speak your truth. So, what difficulties have you gone through? Speak about that. If you haven't spoken about that, then you wouldn't know how to articulate it, you wouldn't know how to bring it up, you wouldn't know how to educate other people about it. If you find that it's an interesting fact that you walked down the street and you tripped and fell, talk about that. How did you feel? What was your opinion about it? And the more you share this, the more likely it will be that other people will find some kind of resonance with what you say, or at least the manner by which you said it. And this makes it really powerful because the end goal is to ensure that whatever you have inside of you is brought out explicitly. Then you hone it again and again and again, and you speak about it over and over and over. And in the span of a few years, what's going to happen is you curate certain messages that become very, very impactful. I can tell you, Jim Rohn, go watch all of his videos on YouTube. He speaks about the stuff that are evergreen. Everything that he talks about is repeated in all of his lectures again and again and again. But it just keeps getting better. Man, if you listen to his earlier speeches and his later speeches, you'll probably find that there are poles apart. So don't take the opportunity to keep quiet. Instead, speak up, especially when you feel like you've got nothing else to say. Number 6, instead of avoiding the fear of the big goal, chase the fear of the big goal. Now, again, this is all about counterintuition. When you chase the fear of the big goal, it's because you're recognizing that that fear, no matter how negative it sounds, it is a signal. It is something that's getting you to something much, much better. Think about the last time you set a goal, by the way. And when you set that goal, wasn't it true that it was a little bit scary? Especially something that was meaningful, worthwhile, and it was big. If you had those and you're chasing after that, imagine and you actually accomplished it. Imagine what's the difference it could make if you start looking for the signals that actually get you to the goal that you want. Wouldn't that be a treasure trove of amazing possibilities? So I thought about this and I said, damn, there are so many things that are causing me to feel stress and struggle. And I want to set this goal. I want to reach, 10 million, 100 million people on YouTube, whatever it is, right? In the back of my head, there's this voice that goes like, who the hell do you think you are, blah, blah, blah. And yes, there is this voice, but there's also this fear. So rather than just listening to the voice and getting myself shut down and listening to the fear and getting shut down, I'll chase after that fear. I'll chase after that voice that says, who the hell do you think you are? And then maybe I'll treat it like a fact. I'll go like, who am I? And I'll chase that fear because I can utilize that message. And I can utilize that messenger to point me in the right direction. Whenever I see that I'm fearful about something that I want to chase, that's where I ought to be. Number 7, staying away from everything that people are just talking about and not doing. Now, one of the things that I'm very, very cognizant of is something known as congruence. So congruence tells me that whenever I say something and I do something, these two align and they match up. So for example, if I'm really, really energized and I said, I'm really unmotivated, that's a state of incongruence. In situations where I talk about confidence and I suddenly feel like I'm not very confident, that's a state of incongruence. So I want to chase after things that I look at in the world that are congruent and whole. I don't want to chase after things that are not congruent and not whole. For example, no matter how people explain it, by the way, the explanation to me is less important than the manner by which it is being pursued. if I take a look at people who are talking about, let's say, feminism, and I don't mean to be political about this whole thing, there are some people who don't understand the way that feminism actually works. So they argue in their favor rather than argue for the principle itself. So that becomes a bit of a problem. So it's very hard for me to understand the logic behind that and stand behind that. It's not that I don't stand behind feminism. The ideas I carry and the approach I carry towards coaching, towards nurturing people's ideas, towards education are probably a little bit more nurturing than the average person. So I tend to think that there needs to be a little bit more fleshing out of what we mean by certain terms, whether it's feminism, whether it is a certain kind of aim or social cause that we're leaning into. Like this whole idea of diversity. Yeah, you claim that you want diversity, but you want diversity only in a specific area. That's very incongruent. So I decided that I will shift myself from looking at other people and what they do and aspiring towards those people who are more congruent rather than less congruent. I'll keep my mind open about people who are less congruent though, because I know I'm not completely congruent myself. So this is where if you chase congruence, chances are you will resonate, you'll shine, you'll grow, and rather than just get drowned in this entire social media game where people are just talking about stuff and not really getting any kind of congruent result in their lives. You know, people who talk about goal setting but don't get goals. People who talk about branding but don't have a good brand. Things like that. So that's something that I constantly work towards. And by extension of this, look at the things that I'm incongruent about and strive towards growing that in a manner that defies the incongruence. So I go in defiance of my incongruence. When I'm anxious and yet I talk about confidence on stage, I will fight against my anxiety. If I am feeling unworthy and I'm talking about meaningful life goals, I combat my sense of unworthiness. So there are ways by which I do this. I won't go into that in this video, but if you'd like me to talk a little bit more about that, just drop me a comment. But do remember at this juncture to like and subscribe to this video if you found that it's valuable so far. Number 8, and this is a very interesting paradoxical principle. The struggle makes you feel weak, but actually makes you stronger. So I know that it's quite important for us to continue to struggle, but it's not about the struggle that people impose on you. That's probably not warranted, even though it could be functional. I'll give you a case in point. In recent days, we've been seeing a lot of people shutting people down. They call it cancellation. You know, I'm of a generation that doesn't quite understand all of these terms, wokeism, cancellation, all that kind of stuff. But there are many terms that are now available in our cultural lingo that suggest that there's a certain kind of power or there's some kind of institutional norm that causes people to feel a certain way. I don't quite buy that. I know what it's like to be persecuted. It has happened to me before. It's not a fun experience. But there are ways by which we can actually shut off the inner experience and lean into things which are more valuable for us. To be able to go into a state of nothingness when there's so much clamor inside the mind is actually quite a useful thing. I believe there's a functional Taoist philosophy surrounding it, which is called Wu Wei. And by being able to put yourself into this ether of nothingness actually could potentially help. Now, again, I'm not talking about you avoiding things. I'm asking you to stand in the eye of the hurricane. So when there's a storm and you know how to stand without fear and knowing that this is nothing and there is nothing, stepping into that fray doesn't necessarily make you feel really bad or anything like that. So the sense of frustration, for example, is going to likely cause a lot of derailment, for example. High levels of pressure, creating derailment and creating a whole lot of anxiety inside you. But that's a struggle that you need to lean into. Because as you struggle towards something worthwhile, many of these obstacles are going to come in your path, right? So as these obstacles pop up, utilize these obstacles to test your limit, number one. But number two, allow yourself to be in the struggle so that it makes you stronger. Now, biologically, of course, it brings to mind the entire analogy of a butterfly that's coming out of its chrysalis. Now, if you just cut open the chrysalis, there is a muscle growth, and I'm not a biologist, so I won't be able to give you all the necessary details about that. It does seem like you're harming that insect rather than helping it by thinking that helping it come out of its chrysalis is the end result. I've got a very interesting illustration to talk about here, because in one of my training programs, I was delivering a program to relatively young people. So I was probably one of the oldest in the room with, apparently I thought, a lot of wisdom. When I said you gotta struggle, one of the group members actually gaslighted me by telling by telling his bosses that I was saying that he was not good enough. Now, I never said that, and all I said was that whatever it is that you're having a struggle with right now, that's really nothing compared with what else society and difficulties and challenges ahead of you are going to put on you. And he had the audacity to go up to his superiors and say, this guy is saying that my experiences are nothing and he's talking down to us. Now, I don't quite appreciate that, and I think it needs some speaking up against, because whatever the case, when you're relatively young, you need to put yourself under some kind of struggle. It doesn't matter what kind of struggle. Don't let me be the guy who puts the pressure on you. Let you be the person who puts the pressure on you. And it proved my point, literally. That means my words were so harsh to this person, it felt like daggers. Whereas the average person who's really gone through a lot of struggle will probably look at me and go like, you know what? He's right. You put pressure on yourself, you struggle, and then you become far more confident than anybody can give you credit for. And I believe very strongly that that confrontation process, while scary, doesn't make you weak. In fact, it makes you far stronger than you can actually think of, rather than just some philosophical debate going like, oh, this guy's talking down to us, or this guy's got a different philosophy than us. I'm not talking about philosophy. I'm talking about doing your freaking push-ups. Go out there and do 20 push-ups, 40 push-ups, 100 push-ups, 250 push-ups. As you struggle through that confrontation, you put a goal into you, and as a result, you struggle towards that goal. And that makes everything that you're doing worthwhile, because number one, you see progression, you are able to stand up against some pressure that you put on yourself. Otherwise, when you end up in some other place that requires you to do that, or requires you to stand under pressure, you can't. You buckle under the pressure. And that's very dangerous, and I don't want that for any one of you. So every single time I have the opportunity to face a certain kind of pressure, it could be psychological pressure, social pressure, spiritual pressure, physical pressure, emotional pressure. All of these are just part and parcel of me disciplining myself. Now, you can choose not to do it, it's just a recommendation, but what I found is that whenever I struggle and I get to that next level, everything else seems easier. And you know what? It's very funny that the kinds of struggles that I'm working towards tend to be the kinds of struggles that liberate me much, much further down the future, and I realize that all the dots connect. Like, for example, if you're physically weak, or if you are poor in articulating your thoughts, and you struggle against that, right? Someday down the line, because you put yourself out there, people are going to see it, and then guess what? They're going to start inviting you to, hey, let's go gym. And then when you go gym with this group of people, you encounter more opportunities. And then these opportunities take flight. Now, the dots will connect insofar as you work with your struggles, which is another thing. I don't quite agree with the idea that we only lean into our strengths, right? Leaning into your strengths sometimes means that you overplay things that should not be there at the wrong context. I mean, you might be a comedian and you go around to people's funerals and you crack jokes at the dead. Not quite a smart idea, don't you think? So I think it's all context driven. You can have strengths, but you also need to work on your weaknesses, and you need to potentially work on certain kinds of weaknesses in anticipation of the future. For example, if it hasn't occurred to you by now that the internet is a huge thing, surely, if it is a weakness and you haven't really studied it, surely you need to lean into it a little bit more so that it doesn't become a stumbling block. My heart goes out to those who are really struggling. For example, they struggle with even, especially those of a certain generation, right? They struggle with setting up a Facebook account, literally. And when that happens, it becomes tedious and they shy away from the tedium. But guess what? When you're shying away from the tedium, no matter how simple it seems and no matter how stupid you think you look, that's beside the point. I think when you struggle, your struggle has to be a worthy thing that you can see as a trend moving forward. one of the struggles I had was video recording, and look at me now. In the past I was avoiding it. I looked at my screen and I said, this is so bloody tedious, it's gonna take so much time. And now I just love all of my video editors who are putting together such magnificent things in such a short span of time. I'm grateful. I have a huge amount of respect and appreciation for people who are doing this art. But I couldn't do that if I didn't understand how tedious it was. And when I put myself in my own shoes, whenever I have any sense of resentment for people, chances are I haven't walked around in their shoes before. So, coming back to this idea of struggle, it helps you with empathy, it helps you to grow, it helps you to test your limits, it helps you to identify your progression points, it helps you to hone your strengths, it actually also helps you to liberate yourself from your weaknesses. Why the hell are we doing it, right? So let's struggle together, let's find ways to look for better struggles that are worthwhile and will pay off in the long run, alright? Now, number 9, doing more with less. It sounds like there's a lot of effort going through all of these counterintuitive principles. In fact, to even wrap your head around it, it seems a little bit awkward, isn't it? But I think that we can do more with less. How do we actually take this advantage of ours to be adaptable, to be effective by putting ourselves into different areas? So I'll cite you a very interesting story that was told by Patrick Grove. I'm not sure whether you guys know Patrick Grove, but you can Google him. He's a relatively big-time venture capitalist. When I met him on one of the rooftop bars, I think it was called Luna Bar, if I'm not mistaken, in Kuala Lumpur, way back in 2008, he was invited by my friend Vishen Lakiani, and Vishen had very generously sponsored the entire dinner for the speakers that I had brought in from the United States and UK and different parts of the world. And at that point of time, that kind of interaction was rare. It was difficult to establish a network. So obviously some of these guys were a little bit skeptical about the approach. And, I asked the question. I think Vishen took a little bit of offense at one of the speakers, but he just generously went ahead anyway. And eventually what happened was we had a really good time. And I went up to that speaker and said, you see, but at the point of time, there was another guy who was in that group, sat down with him, and he was going like, who are all these people? I introduced myself. He mentioned that he was into publishing line, and he was publishing magazines. I said, okay, that's pretty cool. This is 2008, mind you, okay? Magazines still existed, kind of, in that day. So we had this conversation. I said, that guy writes landing pages with long-form sales copy, and he makes $1 million a year. For each copy that he writes. He launches products, he probably sells like $1 million worth of stuff within a week, and so on and so forth. I laid out the entire digital realm for him, and I remember him saying, sounds like I'm in the wrong business. Now the fact that he said that told me loads about his character. In other words, he was humble intellectually, was willing to accept new ideas. And what was even more amazing was that within the span of, you fast forward to 2017 or 2016, I don't remember the actual year, he'd already built an online empire by converting his magazines into the online space. He built a huge user base. He sold everything to Rupert Murdoch for over $700 million and became the 7th richest man in Australia. And of course, he talks about this entire thing about journaling and leveraging different kinds of resources. At least the way I see it is him leveraging different kinds of resources. Did you know, for example, a new environment is a resource? Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You are jammed in your head. You want to write something and you're jammed in your head. What do? You use something to get you to kickstart that creative process, right? So a simple way of changing your environment, getting away from your normal place of work and going down to the beach or going down to Starbucks in this particular mall or Coffee Bean in that other mall, it does give you a sense that, hey, there's something different about it, and it does shift your mind frame a little bit, doesn't it? So that's what he did. He says he goes to Starbucks and he goes to different Starbucks every time to kind of create his how-tos. And you do process mapping, not really process mapping the way you think, but he'll think through the entire thing. What does he know? What does he not know? And it's all on YouTube. You can go to Mind Valley's collection on YouTube and take a look at exactly what he said when he was in Bali 2018. And what's fascinating about this is that he was doing a lot more with a lot less, even though whatever he was doing at that point of time was working. The alternative, my friends, is that we end up doing less with more. We work harder, we get this incremental amount of return, right? So which one is more appealing? And in order for us to do more with less, we need to shift the way by which we're thinking. And therefore, this mindset requires us to shift into a slightly different frame. Can I or can I not think of better ways to do more with less? Can I revamp everything? I might be publishing a physical newsletter, but now how about taking it online and utilize that online space to multiply my value? Suffice to say, in this day and age, we are in probably a space where people want to do more with less, but they don't know how. And you could, with your expert guidance, help them to do more with less. Rather than saying that I'm going to do more, like putting in more effort with less resources, think about it slightly differently. I'm going to accomplish more outcomes with less effort. And how do you do that? You have to question your assumptions about everything. So, my friends, I hope that this video on counterintuitive decision making is going to be helpful for you. In my opinion, I think it's going to help you with your own personal self-leadership. It's going to stretch your imagination a little bit, possibly create new paradigm shifts inside of your mind the way you need. Of course, the problem is most people who need this paradigm shift aren't listening. Even at this stage, if you're listening, it must mean that you agree with my principles already, right? So do me a favor. And this is literally imploring those of us who find that this is important, and there are people that we love, people who are out there in society who need to have this, share this video. Click on the like button, click on the subscribe button, and make sure that this gets into the YouTube algorithm so that we'll be able to reach out to more people who can benefit from this information that normally would have only been conducted in high-level masterminds or high-level workshops that they had to pay thousands of dollars for. So take this information, send it out to as many people as you can so that as a community, we can elevate people to a level beyond challenge and suffering so that they can take actions for abundance.